Welcome to Technovation. I'm your host, Peter High. My guest today is Shubham Mehrish. Shubham is the global vice president of Mars, a privately held food company that Forbes estimates to earn roughly $45 billion in annual revenue. Shubham leads design thinking, artificial intelligence, process automation, advanced analytics, digital demand, data engineering, and platform teams. A lot of very innovative topics, to say the least. He's been in his role for a bit more than a year and a half, and with the company for 5. Given the number of innovative topics that he leads for one of the largest privately held companies in the world, I look forward to diving into these in greater detail to understand what he and the team are working on. Shubham, welcome to Technovation. It's wonderful to see you and to speak with you today.
Great to be here, Peter. Thank you.
Wonderful. Shubham, maybe just if you don't mind, you can provide a bit of an overview to Mars business, a business that especially candy lovers will be very familiar with, but pet lovers will as well. Talk a bit about the business you're in, if you would.
Sure, and that is something that not many people, at least on the street, if you will, are aware of. And so, yes, we are the world's largest on both sides of the aisle, if you will. We are the world's largest confectionery, governments, and now obviously healthy snacking company. And we are also the world's largest pet care company. And the pet care business is a full life cycle business, as some of your audience may be aware. So, if you think about the life cycle of a pet, everything from genetic testing services through to lab services to vet clinics to food and nutrition to a product that basically is a GPS Fitbit style tracker for your pet. I mean, we do cover a whole host of life cycle modalities, if you will, in the pet care business. And so it is a pretty comprehensive business on both sides of the aisle. And I don't know if you've seen some of the public figures. Last year, there was a big news item on how Mars is now bigger than Coca-Cola. I don't know if you remember that article. I think it was Forbes or somebody had it. And so, at last reported $45 billion in revenues and over 140,000 associates. And we call our employees associates. It is as big as a small country now.
No, that's pretty consequential, to say the least. And as a result of that, yours is a consequential role as well. Let's get into that. I listed off a number of things that are under your purview. I wonder if there's anything that you'd add to that, just to sort of help us understand how you define the breadbox that is your set of responsibilities.
Thanks for that. And the role has actually evolved over the years. So when I joined 5 years back, I was hired, which was more kind of focused on my analytics experience. And so I had been before Mars in a bunch of startups, consulting firms, focused on big data analytics. And I've been in this space for the last 10 plus years. And so when I was brought into Mars, the company leadership actually was really looking to set up on a transformation program on analytics, data foundations, etc. And so that's how I started in the company. And as we obviously knew going in, and as we kind of built out the analytics team and the analytics practice, we realized that, to solve analytics, you need to solve our data foundations as well. To solve data foundations, you need to solve master data and upstream processes. And in order to then get value out of data, you need, the analytical layer, you need AI. And if you keep going up the stack, you need, integration with consumer experiences and customer experiences, etc. So over time, we built out the portfolio, if you will, to become a vertically integrated almost stack that goes all the way from metal to consumer experiences. And so I don't want to claim that there was a grand design behind how the team has come together, but it did evolve over time as we learned what worked, what didn't work, and as the market, frankly, was evolving. And so it's been an evolution, and so it is a pretty comprehensive portfolio. And as our businesses have grown, and as we have grown teams within our businesses, and I sit at the corporate center, but as we have grown teams within the businesses, we've also started moving people in and out of the stack, if you will, so that we can replicate the stack of capabilities in our businesses as well.
But talk a bit about that team, if you would. How do you, given the variety of things related to beginning with, as you mentioned, big data analytics, but expanding into a variety of related areas? I mentioned design thinking and artificial intelligence, process automation, and the rest of what was described earlier. Talk a bit about how you have formed your team, and maybe a bit about its scale and its substance, if you would.
So I think at this point, Mars obviously also outsources a lot of some of this work, and so I don't know if I can reveal the full scale of the group, but basically, when we started 5 years ago, our first push was to hire about 70, data scientists and data engineers, as an example, just to give you a sense for the scale when we incepted this team. And over the years, it's grown, and so now, I wouldn't be surprised if the number is over 600, 700 associates that would identify themselves in one of these kind of layers of the stack, one or more maybe layers of the stack. So we are looking at about 700, 800 associates, and then a few thousand third-party partners. And so it's a pretty sizable team now for the company. But for the scale of our company, it is, I would say, at benchmark levels from an industry standpoint. And understand this, that we are not a pure play CPG anymore, right? And so, I think you can still classify about 75, 80% if you stretch it of our business as a consumer products business, but we are actually rapidly morphing to become a CPG and services, consumer products and services business. And so in that sense, the benchmarks are slightly different than what you would traditionally call our peer group. And that holds true even for things like artificial intelligence. I mean, we do not look at the consumer products companies alone as the peer group to either learn from or benchmark against. And so it's quite fascinating how we've kind of evolved our benchmarks accordingly as we evolve the company.
And you highlight a really important point, Shubham, which is that the topics that you are responsible for require an ecosystem. Of course, talented people first and foremost within the organization, and remarkable to hear that in just 5 short years, basically an order of magnitude growth in terms of just data science to begin with, and the team more generally speaking. Talk a bit about, with specifics or more generally, depending upon what's appropriate to share, how you've thought about building that ecosystem, both internally, but as you point out, substantially externally as well, to deliver what you do.
Yeah, as I had mentioned, I mean, what we are trying to do as a technology and digital strategy is to move more and more towards a modular architectural approach. And so while we obviously still have our big cloud partners at the base layer, if you will, on the infrastructure side, the rest of the approach is highly modular. The rest of the stack is quite modular, and it's a best of breed. We're not all the way to microservices, but I would say composable API driven approach. And so that's how we've kind of built out the stack. So you would have the big behemoths that provide cloud offerings and their stacks at the base layer, but then as you go higher and higher towards the consumer facing layer, it becomes more and more modular and best of breed. And so that's how we've kind of evolved the technology strategy. In terms of the associate strategy, again, as I mentioned, I mean, we do tend to hire from outside the consumer products business as well, quite heavily, partly because of how we are evolving. And so these days, we are focused on kind of two big components. There's the core of our digital capabilities, and there's the growth oriented capabilities. And so depending on where you sit, our hiring strategy and talent recruitment and development strategy varies. But that's basically how we have kind of evolved over the years.
Very interesting to hear about the leap from the traditional kind of area in which you're famous, CPG, to more services, for example. And naturally, as you point out, some differences in terms of the skill sets that are necessary in order to breathe life into these growth areas relative to the traditional areas, if you would. And I wonder, as you think about, you've already mentioned what's very interesting is the competitive landscape from which you draw insight and think about differentiation now differs from where maybe even 5 years ago, as some of these growth areas have developed even more momentum. I wonder if you can talk a bit about the growth of your area of influence into some of these growth areas and how that differs from the traditional areas in which the organization has played. How do you think about the application of, analytics, artificial intelligence into some of these new areas as well?
Yeah, I can happy to talk about that. So you mentioned design thinking right in the beginning, and obviously I haven't talked about design thinking so far. Our approach always has been use case driven and consumer first, as opposed to technology first. And so one of the big pitfalls of large company technology and digital organizations is that they get enamored by the technology itself. And in our case, we've always been very focused of technology being an emergent, capability that supports business and supports a use case, as opposed to technology being what you put in first. And so, the way we have evolved over the years has been more and more consumer first and consumer oriented design thinking first based approaches. And so when I look at evolving my teams, that's exactly how I'm kind of building out the technology strategy and the team strategy. And so I'll give you a few examples. So, a few years ago, we realized that radiology in the area of AI was going to be pretty massive and a differentiator for us. And partly because we had an ecosystem of X-rays and reports that we had kind of developed over the years as a business, and so we had to build out our radiology team accordingly. And the way we built that out was not saying, "Hey, I'm going to hire 80 data scientists and start tinkering around with radiology data sets." We said, "Hey, what are vets looking for? What is it that what's the gap in the marketplace from a AI driven radiology perspective? What are humans doing? What are human health? What is human health doing in X-ray and radiology?" And so you start backwards from the consumer and in this case the vet professional side, and then build out the business accordingly. And that's true even for our CPG businesses, but it's even more so with our services business. So again, it's a very conscious outside in approach, as opposed to a technology first approach.
You mentioned the customer at the center, who may be human or a pet, obviously with an extension to a human.
Yes.
Who'd be tied to the pet. Talk a bit about, from a digital perspective, how that experience is evolving. So much of what you do is very tactile. Anyone can think about enjoying the snacks, for example, that you develop and have in the marketplace, a very tactile experience. And so the translation to digital versions of this may, to the uninitiated, be quite a leap to understand. Talk a bit about how you think about that, the digital customer experience, and how that enhances the tactile experience that you're famous for.
Right. And maybe what I could do there is take an example from our CPG business, because obviously the vet health business is pretty obvious, right? So we run hospitals, clinics, and so the consumer touch point there is quite obvious. But let me take an example of one of our most famous iconic brands, M&Ms. What we realized a few years back was that, and you can see that in the market with the new Barbie movie, etc. But we can go into the theory behind the Barbie movie. But on the M&M's brand, we realized that the value exchange for a consumer product has evolved. Right? In the past, the value exchange for a consumer product was, you pay me money for a quality product at the best possible cost point, right, and price point, and it was really a money for a quality product exchange and nothing else. And over the years, what has happened is that the value exchange for anything now, whether it's a product or a service, has become a lot more multidimensional, right? And so the value exchange is, you're not just buying M&M's, the product, but you're also buying what the brand stands for. You're buying maybe an experience that is kind of joined with the purpose of the brand and what you believe. You're buying and maybe an immersive experience where you can relate to the brand a little more, right, than you used to as a product transaction or as a consumable kind of transaction. And so as the value exchange has evolved, we've also started evolving our go-to-market and our consumer interaction model. And so M&M's is an example where 2.5 years ago, we faced the choice of revamping our website. 2 years back, you would have just said, hey, it's a website. Okay, fine. Pick your poison, Adobe, Salesforce, whatever, revamp the website. Yes, it's a direct to consumer play along with our retail operations and our partners like Walmart, etc. But it's a website. And what we did there was we said, no, let's think about where this brand is going. Where is the value exchange going? What does that mean for the brand's evolution from an interaction standpoint? And then say, what does it mean for a technology strategy? And it was very clear, if you thought about it that way, that the technology strategy has to be a mark-oriented strategy. And mark, for your listeners, is basically microservices, API-driven, cloud, headless architecture strategy. Why? Because we may evolve this brand into movies, into integrating with NFTs, which we did, by the way, into maybe VR, AR experiences in the future, maybe an augmented experience in our stores. And so the moment you start thinking future back, you suddenly realize that the technology strategy of a website replacement is no longer a website replacement, just a website replacement, right? And so if you go to that site now, it is actually built on mark principles. It is actually quite extensible to other experiences. It is modular, it's composable, and so much so that our partners that worked with us said, we have not seen this before. Can we take it to market jointly with you? And so we have a product out in the market where Mars is supporting a product where we have packaged our IP and we have opened it up for the market because it was so good, so unique, and our partners said, hey, can we monetize this with you? And so that gives you hopefully a sense for how kind of the thinking on technology, AI, analytics, data, everything has to change. And it has to start from where are you taking the brand and the consumer experience and then work backwards. And so that's been a big, big learning for us. And that's something that we are continuing to double down on.
So much of what you talk about, Shubham, you are clearly a deep technologist, but the comments you're making draw heavily on brand, on marketing, on sales, of course. And clearly, as design thinking itself also bleeds or blends across a variety of skill sets. Yeah. I'd love to understand a bit more about how you draw in people with a variety of disciplines to the work you do across your organization. Clearly, yours is one that is not, I'm sure you have natural silos, but they seem to be very permeable silos, allowing talented people to pass across there to collaborate in some interesting, unusual ways, and thus leading to the kinds of insights you're drawing from. Can you talk a bit about how that collaboration works?
Yeah, so I think, I'm a student of, obviously, first and foremost, my own creative process, right? Which everybody is, I guess. And also of creativity and how innovation happens. And so when I looked across the literature and my own process, I realized that, people talk about creativity as if creativity in and of itself is a skill that you learn. Actually, when I studied my own creative process and the ability to connect the dots like we are talking about, I quickly realized that creativity is actually an emergent property. It's an emergent skill. It's not like you go to a class and you're going to learn creativity. No, you're going to learn what causes creativity to happen, right? And if you dive deeper into that construct, what causes creativity to flower and happen is three things. Okay, it's first and foremost curiosity. And some of that curiosity is directed curiosity, some of that is undirected curiosity. So the first thing that we look for when we're hiring people is, do they have a learner's mindset? Are they curious? And they need not be curious about APIs and the job that they do. They could be curious about anything. If you're curious about Wes Anderson movies, I'm happy for you. And I will still figure out if that curiosity is limited to Wes Anderson movies, or can that extend to other realms, right? And so we are first and foremost looking for curious people. And we are trying to build out that curious mindset. And I have always talked about things that are outside of work, right, in my internal team meetings, because I really want to hammer home the point that it's okay to be curious. I want you to be curious, and curiosity doesn't stop at work, right? And so that's the first thing that I think is a key ingredient to the emergent property called creativity. The second key ingredient is collaboration. Creativity happens when you're bouncing off ideas. Creativity happens when you're being highly collaborative in the pursuit of a problem, right? And so obviously there is the problem to be solved that starts it all. But assuming that you have a problem to be solved and you have curious people, the next thing you need is collaboration. And for that, what you need is psychological safety. There are other kind of things that you need to engineer a collaborative atmosphere. But collaboration is the second thing. And the third thing is, a license to experiment and fail and test and learn. And so if you put these three things together, curiosity, collaboration, and experimentation, that is what leads to the emergence of creativity. So when I look at either hiring people or structuring the teams or talking to our management teams on how to fund some of our innovative endeavors, this is the kind of mental model that I use, right? And over time, there are other things that emerge from this mental model. A learner's mindset emerges from here. Confidence emerges from here, right? As a company, not individually alone, but as a company. I mean, if 300 people got together to implement a new M&M's, experience, and these 300 were not all technologists, imagine the confidence that they have when they have to do the next new thing, right? And so again, there are lots of benefits of that core construct of curiosity, collaboration, and the license to experiment. And so that's really the mental model that kind of I apply when I'm looking at either building teams or solving a problem with teams. And so again, I don't know if that helps give you a sense for how we kind of approach these things at Mars, but that's something that now we are taking to other teams as well. So what if you're a finance team? Yes, you're a marketer, you're expected to be creative, but if you're a finance team, you're not expected to be creative. I don't want you to be creative accounting wise, but I still want you to be creative, right? So again, I mean, that's the thing that we're taking elsewhere. So, and that is what the digital mindset really means for us as well. And so digital doesn't stop at technology, it doesn't stop with my team at Mars. And that's the movement that we are trying to drive.
I really like that. Some fascinating insights you had from across this. And it brings to mind the necessity to get outside of your comfort zone, to have the confidence, as you say, to tackle difficult problems. I think that there's oftentimes, especially younger teammates, but to some extent, perhaps many others as well, have the fear of approaching things that they're not confident in or have never experienced before. Getting over the hump of that through a variety of new experiences and successfully seeing those through oftentimes is the best way to gain greater confidence next time there is some challenge you have that you've never been a part of previously, and overcoming that. It's a means of gaining, I like how you said it also, company-wide confidence, not just individual confidence, the collective confidence culturally. Very, very interesting insights from that perspective.
As a company, I mean, I can see that change happening, right? So it's not that we don't fail and everything is as successful as the M&Ms, rebuild, if you will. But I can see how we tackle failure. I can begin to see how we are taking learnings from that failure. So it's one thing to say, I don't care about failure. It's okay to fail, but you still want to take learnings out of that failure, so you're not doing that again. So I can see that happening now, and there are many examples where we have failed actually. And I can give you a couple. I mean, direct to consumer. Everybody jumped into direct to consumer. Every CPG brand jumped into direct to consumer in the last few years, and it's not that we haven't been less successful, than we expected, but it's what you do with that failure. And what is the lesson that you take from that failure? Is the lesson we shouldn't be in direct to consumer, or is the lesson that maybe we were over ambitious on these three things, right? Maybe we really didn't think that customer acquisition costs would go down less precipitously as we saw. They didn't come down as fast as we wanted them to with scale and so on and so forth. So you need to take those learnings, and then you say, what does that mean for the future? So I think there's something to be said about how you take failure as well, not just giving a license to fail, and so on and so forth that we can get into. But I just think that it should be said that not everything is successful, and that's okay.
Again, really critical cultural elements as well. Well, an area of great experimentation where certainly the pathways to success are not fully known yet are around generative artificial intelligence, generative AI.
Yeah,
And as somebody who's been immersed in data analytics, machine learning, artificial intelligence, RPA, a lot of the kind of necessary ingredients that
yeah,
educate one into the potential relative to a topic that is really, in the grand scheme of things, still so new within an enterprise and even a consumer perspective now. What's your
yeah.
thought process there? I'd be interested in the way in which you're thinking about experimenting with it and how bullish or bearish you may be as to the possibilities relative to it.
Yeah, so the first thing that I would say, there are two, three things that jump at me about generative AI, and actually, I am less skeptical than I was, 6 months ago, right? And so 6 months back, when we just had the November release of ChatGPT, etc. I mean, I was a lot more skeptical than I am now, given that there is a pace of change that we are all seeing in the last 6 months itself as well. Um, but there are a few areas that are emerging. So the first thing I want to say is that it's early days for everyone. Okay, so if you are a consumer products company that is saying, "Oh, am I late?" You're not late. In fact, even big technology companies that talk to us are freely admitting that they are still learning, that they don't know how everything works. They know some of this, but they don't know how everything comes together and how it really works. And you can listen to any podcast of any of these big companies, and you will see that they're admitting to that. So everybody's learning. We are still in an early phase of evolution, but it is quite clear to us that this is something special and there's something going on here. This is not a blockchain crypto moment. This is probably more real than that. And somebody's going to beat me up for saying that, but this is probably more real than that. And there are some very clear use cases that are emerging in our minds, right? So one is the whole summarization, and the Microsoft calls it the Copilot model, where you have a Copilot that's an AI that is helping you with simple tasks to begin with, which is document retrieval, summarization of documents, search, semantic search. And those are things that are very clearly going to remain. They're very clearly breakthrough technologies. They are indeed a Google moment, where Google was what Google was for the internet. The maybe chat remains the interface, but GPT is for an enterprise search, right? For example, and so that's one. So the semantic search, summarization, retrieval of nuggets from documents is one bucket, I would say, that is quite clearly there, and it's going to accelerate. The second is completion, right? So sentence completion or code completion. And so clearly coding and software engineering is going to be equal parts or more prompt engineering going forward than not. So coding and software is the other big area. So again, the summarization and then the sentence completion leading to coding is the second one. The third one is the diffusion models, right? So the third area is generative AI as it relates to diffusion models, right? And diffusion models like Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, etc., where content generation, especially images, and conversely, understanding of images, right, and into maybe text or other forms of other modalities is going to be the third big area of growth that is already there. You can see the version 1 to version 5 of Midjourney and how that's evolved and how hyper realistic those images are now, to understand the power of that piece. And the fourth, which I wouldn't really classify it as an individual area in and of itself, is probably a combination of the other three, right? So consumer experiences, right? How do you build consumer experiences taking into account image generation, sentence completion, and summarization as the three big use cases that are emerging, and create a unique consumer experience? Maybe it's chat oriented, maybe it's something else, maybe it's personalized, hyper personalized consumer experience, which is an outcome of the other three. But that's what we are seeing play out in this space. like any other company, we have a lot of questions from our board management on this topic. And we are early days and we're still trying to put together the strategy, etc. But what we are very clear is that we will always be principle driven. And we have the Mars 5 principles. For those of you who don't know, you can go to our website: quality, responsibility, mutuality, efficiency, and freedom. And so we will always remain grounded in our principles and purpose. We will be responsible. And so we are not going to, we have shut down, chat GPT experiments without approvals. You can't just go and, with your enterprise account, work on that. So we are going to be responsible. We are looking at this space very clearly, closely. We are in close contact with our R&D teams in our partners, Microsoft, AWS, Google, etc. So we are very tight with them. And so, we are taking a measured, but we're clearly seeing the signs of this being something really big. So I hope that kind of gives the audience a sense for the domain areas that we're looking at without being too specific on, in supply chain, I'm seeing this and that, but you can kind of, extrapolate those and where they may be more applicable than not.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask, Shubham, I mentioned at the outset, you're a privately held company. You've alluded to it as well. Are there any interesting aspects to the way in which you think about investments that are different from a publicly traded company? There are some obvious ones that might come to mind, but I wonder how that applies, from a cultural perspective, different from other companies you may have worked for that were publicly traded.
Right. So, we do measure ourselves across 4 big dimensions as a company. And so let me start there, and then I'll go to capital allocation a little bit as it relates to digital. The way we measure ourselves is across 4 kind of quadrants, if you will. It's obviously financial growth, right? And how well we're doing there, top tier financial performance. And, as I said, our peer group is changing as we evolve, but top tier in whatever the peer group definition is. Obviously, we want our growth to be quality growth and not a one-off growth. So the second quadrant one is financial performance, which is the P&L. The second is growth orientation. We want to be in tailwind categories. We want to be in categories that naturally have a tailwind behind them. And so we are not growing because we're taking price. We are growing because the category is growing. So that has always been our philosophy. That's always been the philosophy of top tier CPGs. And so that remains a key component of the 4 quadrants. And then there are 2 quadrants in the bottom, but in no means less important for us. And the third one is trusted partnerships. And that kind of ties in with our mutuality principle as well a little bit. But basically, we want to be trusted partners of all our stakeholders. And so the stakeholders could be vendors. The stakeholders are communities that we live in. The stakeholders are communities that we buy from, right? Whether it's cocoa or other products. And so there's the trusted partnership piece on how effective are we in the world we live in, right? So that's the trusted partnership. And then the 4th one is positive societal impact. And there we have a commitment to our pets. We have a commitment to the planet. We have a commitment to net zero, which is one of the more aggressive commitments that you would see from a large company of our scale. And so those are the 4 quadrants. And so when I think about any capital allocation decision, whether it's a digital decision or an M&A decision, I do look at all these quadrants and see how it sits with all of these quadrants before making that decision. So we have over the years honed our process, and being private allows us to think longer term. I am not sitting here, I don't have a gun to my head, next quarterly report, I have to show some growth. And we are blessed that we are growing pretty nicely. But unlike a publicly held company, I don't have those constraints. And I don't have the documentation constraints, while we do produce a lot of documentation, but I don't have the kind of constraints that public companies do. So I can think longer term. I can think we have we talk in generations. The generation has multiple meanings. It's the generations of our communities and stakeholders and us, but it also means generations of the Mars family. And so we think in generations and we think longer term, and that completely changes the mindset, how you make decisions, how much you put in terms of investment, all of the above. And you can balance these 4 quadrants also very well in making those decisions. because there is a trade-off, obviously, right, amongst these quadrants. And so you can manage that tension if you think long term. Because if you don't have the long term, if you don't remove the constraint of time like we do, then you can't make those trade-offs, right? You'll always, veer towards the top quadrant of financial performance and quality growth, right? And so again, I mean, all this is publicly available. You can go to our website and read it up. We've been a lot more open about sharing our methodology, our thinking, our principles with the external world. And so I think that's something that your audience could go and read at
Very
mars.com.
interesting. And a good suggestion to do so, to go to mars.com and to see that. I wanted to ask you, Shubham, naturally, given your role, we've talked about a number of rising trends. Any others we've missed that particularly excite you as you look to the future that are making their way onto your roadmap?
Yeah, so I mean, we talked a little bit about marketing, and I still think that marketing is transforming quite dramatically. And obviously there is the news cycle and what will happen with ad-driven business models, etc., from a platform perspective. But I think that there's a pretty significant evolution happening on the relationship between consumers and brands, how you then market, what is permissible, what is not, and how do you stay on top of that. And you've seen some missteps from some of our peers, right? Whether in the beverage industry, etc., where it's a very fine balance, and you got to really be on top of how you're thinking about the value exchange. So there's definitely a sea change. So we talked about AI. I think in marketing as well, there's a lot happening, and with what's happening with Meta and with the EU. As well, etc. So there's something there that we are really keeping our eyes on. And then I think on sustainability, sustainability is a pretty big deal for us. We have been on this journey longer than most, given our long-term thinking and our 4 quadrants that I mentioned. And so I do think that companies don't realize how much investment they need to make to really meet their commitments. And I think there's some companies will be in for a surprise, in terms of either extending their commitments or not being able to meet them. And so I think sustainability and the future of sustainability is a big thing for us. So AI sustainability, the future of marketing, and how brands are built and grown are areas that we really are focused on. And then obviously for us, we are always on the lookout for new pillars of growth. And so acquisitions remains a big area for us. And then there's a long tail of manufacturing excellence, automation in manufacturing, physical automation, not RPA. There's a lot of kind of these initiatives that are at play, and many transformations as well. So, yeah.
Very interesting topics, all. I appreciate you raising those and give us reason to think further about the potential application of those and continued advancement relative to them within the context of Mars. Shubham, I wanted to conclude by asking you for any sort of secrets to your own success. You've reached a position of consequence in an organization of consequence, and have had numerous roles across large-scaled organizations. I wonder, as you reflect upon your career, what some of the difference makers were, perhaps tuned towards others who might be listening, who might wish to walk in your footsteps. What have been some of the keys to your own success?
Yeah, I think, and I have to kind of put it all together, but I think I've given some hints in obviously this conversation as well, in terms of the mental model around how you approach, a new problem or a new job, if you will, in terms of curiosity, collaboration, experimentation, and the stuff that I talked about. But I think in addition to that, I do think that being principled and being genuine, right, and genuinely caring. So I think that shows, and so I think it's sometimes it's hard to maintain, but I think if you can be principled and caring as well, in addition to your mental model on how you hone your skills, which is the more hard skills, if you will, That's really, it's that combination that I think makes somebody successful. Um, I mean, there are lots of resources online that I can point to. Maybe we can add them to the notes, show notes, where I would recommend some books, etc., to read that I have found meaningful from a career development perspective. So if you are looking to go to the next level, what are some of the good books that I've seen and I've read? And so I'm an avid reader. It's just simple things, really. It's so my mental model is not very complex. There's a personal learning mindset mental model. There is the how you deal with your peers and people that report into you mental model, right? And obviously with your seniors. And then the last mental model is obviously don't forget, uh, you know, uh, our work life kind of equation has completely changed, and so don't forget your family and the community that you're in, and that kind of gels well with at least the Mars culture that I've been explaining over the last 40 minutes. And so obviously finding a place where there's a cultural match is quite critical to succeed as well. And for that, you need to know yourself a little more to understand where the match is. These are some of the things that come to mind, but I do want to add some reading references in the show notes.
I would love that. While we're having the conversation, though, is there like maybe one or two or three that immediately come to mind? Some that you maybe return to as points
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
reference?
So I think a few, right? So one is, and I have some of them around here, but I think emotional intelligence. Everybody knows that the Brandon
Mhm.
Goldman book. I mean, so I think that is there. I think Marshall Goldsmith's "What Got You Here," won't get you there, as I think what it's called. And so some of those books I've found quite meaningful as I've kind of grown in my career, right? But we can add a bunch. I mean, these are just top of mind, but again, and if somebody's interested, happy to maybe even add my Twitter handle or something for them to reach out to me. But yeah, I mean, we can. I can share some more that are more specific to subject topics like AI. What's the best book on AI, and what's the best?
Uh-huh.
But the other book that I would really recommend is Build by Tony Fadell, because I think that a lot of the constructs, when you really think about org design, and that is something that occupies a lot of my time. How do you redesign the org for the future? I think there are some nuggets of wisdom in how Tony kind of has talked about product management and the way teams are organized in a product management construct, agile, etc. And so, Build is another book that I would really recommend as a management book, not only as a book to guide your own entrepreneurial journey, but also as a management book. And I think there are some very interesting nuggets of wisdom there too.
Well, Shubham Mehrish, thank you so much for a very thoughtful and thought-provoking conversation, emblematic of this wide array of innovative topics that you lead for Mars. Thank you for letting us into your own thought process, some of the design that you put in place to ensure your team's success. It's been a terrific conversation.
No, thank you, Peter. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So thanks.